Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Revenue Lounge. I am your host, Randy Likas, and joining me today is Jeremy Schwartz. Jeremy is a Senior Manager of Global Lead Management and Strategy at Palo Alto Networks. Jeremy is also one of the pioneers of the buying group motion that everyone is so interested in, and has been speaking at many conferences, webinars, sharing his journey and experience as Palo Alto has transitioned from a traditional lead-based, MQL-based approach to a buying group model. So, Jeremy, I'm super excited to have you join me today. Thank you so much for spending an hour with me.
No, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, me as well. So, Jeremy, I'll set it up, and I'll just say that I think, we are at a seismic shift, or we're on the verge of a seismic shift in terms of how companies are going to be going, changing their go-to-market process and strategy. There's a lot of people who are leaning into this, and there's a lot of interest, but they haven't quite make the move. And so I'd like to start off, first of all, maybe just to talk a little about what it is that you do at Palo Alto. When you're not doing buying groups, or just your overall role at Palo Alto, and then we'll kind of get into how you entered the journey, happened over the past, say, 18, 20 months, and then what's next for y'all. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds great. Sure. So I can start off and talk about what I do when I'm not doing buying groups. So, as you said, I'm the Senior Manager of Global Lead Management and Strategy. And what that means is we are a strategic service partner that sits inside of marketing operations. And we really partner very closely with both marketing teams and sales teams, specifically the BDR organization, SDR, XDR, whatever you call them inside your group. And so, when we're not focused on buying groups, we're focused on things like lead scoring and routing and campaign setup strategy, working with different teams to understand. I just came off a call trying to understand what someone's strategy is so we can help them to set up the campaigns properly to get the scoring outcomes they're hoping to get. And, we look at the lead funnel, the lead health, the health of the lead funnel all the way from start to finish. And by that, I mean the full rev ops funnel. So we look at the income from a marketing side when people first download an ebook or have content syndication, and we look at that all the way through sales, whether it's an MQL that doesn't go anywhere or an opportunity that goes to close won or close lost. And so we try to look at that. And from a marketing operations perspective, I can only anecdotally, get to being involved in a closed won deal. But, when we start thinking about buying groups, marketing can actually have a much more important role in the progression of opportunity.
So, Jeremy, I've heard you speak before about, this idea, where this kind of idea was born, which is when you attended the Forrester conference a couple of years ago. But I suspect that there was probably something rolling in the back of your head around problems in the current way of doing things before you actually had that aha moment. Would love to hear sort of what that was like before the event. Like, did you have sort of an issue with something was bothering you in terms of like the current process and the inefficiency of the current models?
Yeah, absolutely. So I come from a campaign background, and when I ran campaigns for many years, I saw a lot of waste. You drive great MQLs that either don't convert or they convert and then they get thrown back. That second lead syndrome that Forrester talks about. So traditionally you're being asked to do more and more and more, but your budgets are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And so, as a campaign leader, you see that. Now, on the opposite side, as a person who runs our lead management team, and as I said, focused on funnel health, you see a tremendous amount of drop-off. You see MQL to opportunity rates dropping. And remember, that MQL is probably the lowest man on the totem pole, right? So marketing sends a lead. The lead gets converted by a BDR to an omitted opportunity, and the seller has to determine if it's worth their time to take the meeting. When they look at that meeting and they go, this guy's a networking admin at an enterprise company, I'm not wasting my time. So you had a lot of marketing created opportunities that would never go anywhere either. So all the way through the marketing piece of the funnel, we saw tremendous waste. And like you said, I went to the Forrester conference, and really that was the first exposure I had to this concept of the B2B revenue waterfall, thinking about the opportunity waterfall versus the individual MQL waterfall. And that was really eye-opening for me.
So you had the aha moment, you had the idea. I think you said you actually called your manager and was like, look, we're going to be doing this, right? Curious, like what the initial feedback was. Like when you came in and said, like, there's a better way. What was the initial reactions? And I guess the main question is, like, how do you start to sell this concept in initially?
Yeah. So I like you said, I literally came back and was preaching about this to my team, to my manager, to my leaders. Hey, this is amazing. If we do this, we're going to see just better outcomes. How can we start with this? And I sit in marketing operations. I'm a manager in marketing operations, so my influence is what it is. And so our VP told us, well, why don't you guys run a pilot? Let's run a pilot and let's see what the results are, and then maybe we can bring it to leadership. So fine. My manager was 100% behind it. We decided that we were going to do this, and we started to do some research. So we started to understand, I work in a people, processes, systems motion, and we wanted to start to understand, if we wanted to do this, what are the people, what are the processes, and what are the systems that would have to be engaged for us to make this happen? And so we began a 3-month journey of research. And I think that was really where we kicked it off. And that was probably about June of 2023. And like I said, we did this research, and we were very closely partnered with Forrester. I tell you, anyone who's starting on this journey, partnering with Forrester is if you have the ability to do that, because this model is a theoretical model, and it's not a one size fits all, right? Your org is different from this org. I could talk to an org that looks and feels exactly like us, a large cybersecurity company that has the exact same tech stack as us, and they're going to have a different setup and a different outcome because of the way that their systems are tied together. So I think that it's really important to understand that. And, as again, a person who focuses in this kind of approach of people, processes, and systems, that's how we really wanted to start the research. So that we began our journey towards our pilot.
And how did you define which group members or teams to work with on that initial pilot?
That's a great question. So, as with pilots often, you recruit people, you talk and you recruit and you find people who are willing to participate. If we have executive support, you can obviously just get them to say, you're in this project, you're in this project, you're in this project. But when you're, again, in operations and you're trying to reach out, you have to find people who are going to be willing to do things that are outside of their set goals, outside of their KPIs, and take time out of their busy schedules to participate. So we are very close to the BDR org. We're also very close to the campaign teams org. But we realized, and in talking with Forrester, we realized that we really had to start with sales, because if marketing was working on buying groups and there was nowhere for it to go, they would die on the vine. So we started talking with the BDR orgs, and we started talking to them across the globe. We have many products, so we started talking to different groups that have different product representation. And we found people that would be willing to join in this. Yeah, that sounds interesting to me. And we were working with the managers. And so what we ended up doing was we recruited a group of BDRs that represented not every GTM in every theater, but every GTM is our product go-to-markets. We found representation that had a healthy representation of all of our product lines across all of our theaters, across all of our segments, right? So we had an enterprise group here, on our cloud product over here, and we had this nice spread of representation from that. So that's the people internally. But the other side of the buying group is the people externally. Who's the buying group? Okay? Yeah. And that's a really important question. If you ask some people, who's your buying group? Well, anyone in IT is our buying group. That's not true. So we were lucky at Palo Alto Networks. Our data science team, our marketing data science team, puts out a twice annual buyer group analysis. And they look at 2 years of closed won data, and they say these are the people that were present in those deals. And they look at percentages of people and personas that are in those deals. Anyone can do that. Unless you're a brand new company with no data, anyone can mine their data. You don't need to go to an expensive analyst firm, a consulting firm to have them do that. I mean, you can. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but anyone that can mine their own data can do this. You look at 2 years of historical closed won across different segments, across different products, and you can actually get to that data. So by understanding who we were going to recruit to participate, but also who we had to target and understand was the working group, I think those are the real first steps that someone has to take when they're beginning this journey, right? Like, if I was going to do this, who's going to do it is the first thing. And obviously campaign teams are really important. And we started talking to them, but we knew, again, we had to set up this sort of foundation before we could really get them active and engaged in a way that would be meaningful, or to get them to spend dollars, if you think about it from a marketing perspective, to get them to spend dollars on this concept. So that's where we were right out of the gate, is we had identified, we knew our buying groups, and we knew internally who the people were that we would work with.
who sponsored this pilot? Like, at what level of the organization? Because I imagine when you start changing process, people are like, like, what are you doing? Like, this is not how I work. And so I'm curious, like, what objections might you have gotten at the beginning, and was it like, well, we're doing this because so and so says we're doing this, right? So I guess the question is, any initial objections you had initially, and how did you overcome them?
Sure. So we had, as I said, we're in the growth marketing organization. Our operations team is in the growth marketing organization, and our our VP in growth marketing was very supportive of this project. So we knew we had his backing. He said, "Go do it." There were some concerns at first. Wait a minute, if you're gonna farm people that aren't MQLs, isn't that going to screw up our counts? And we said, first of all, it's a small pilot, and we're, the outcome should be more opportunities, right? That's how we tried to sell it. That you should get more opportunities than if we just focus on the MQL. So there wasn't a lot of objection, and because it was small, and we weren't trying to screw with anyone's KPIs or try to transform KPIs out of the gate, we didn't get a ton of it. But we did have that executive support from the VP level. And so from there, we were able to go forward and start to say, that's how we were able to recruit the teams. Hey, our VP supports this. He aligned with the VP on the BDR side, and they were like, sure, people can participate as long as it doesn't take them away from their main job of setting meetings. Well, no, they'll set more meetings. So we then started to say, okay, now we have the people, and we know who the people are internally and externally. What is the process? And that's where we started to say, well, how does this work? What do we have to do to build buying groups? And well, there's two motions. One is a BDR builds a brand new opportunity with a buying group in it. How would they do that? Second motion is a BDR gets the second lead and qualifies them somehow and adds them to an existing opportunity. How would we do that? And so we started to actually research how we would do that today in our current systems. And each of those processes was a lengthy manual process, 10 steps on each side. And so we started to research, like, hey, if I got this thing and I wanted to do these things, how do I farm extra people to get a buying group? How would I work them in outreach? And then if I get these others, how would I make them, attach them to an opportunity and get credit for it as well?
So you started doing the process. It was a kind of manual process that you had set up. How long did the pilot go for? The initial pilot go for?
Sure. So once we understood those processes, we kicked off the pilot. Like I said, that was about 3 months that we did that research, identified the teams, put some enablement material together, trained the BDR teams, and we launched that in. Remember, I said we started this about June of 23. We launched the pilot in September of 23, and we ran it for a quarter. So our fiscal year starts in August. We ran it from the beginning of September through September, October, November. So through mid-November, so almost a full quarter. And the results were amazing.
Let's talk about those.
The results were, a lot of it was anecdotal, and early evidence didn't, have all the pieces. But the early evidence showed some really good stuff. So we ran that pilot for 3 months, and we saw immediately, well, the BDRs were creating more opportunities. Because when we still used the MQL as a trigger. During the pilot, the MQL was still a trigger. But when a BDR got an MQL, remember I said, how would they build a new opportunity? They would go to, we use demand base, you could use 6 Sense, whatever the product is, but they would go into their intent product and they would look at that account and they would look at people who are in our CRM from those same accounts who had engaged with that product recently. So we said, oh, I got John Smith. He's from ABC Company. He reacted with our cloud product. Here's Jane and John that also are from that company that also engaged, but they didn't score up. They just did one thing, but they did it within this recent time frame, and they have personas that match to our buying group. And so the BDR would take those people and bring them over, and they would start to multi-thread in outreach. Hey, I'll use the example. Hey, Randy, are you working with Jeremy? I see you guys are both at Nectar, and you're both interested in our cloud product. And suddenly they got more responses, because when you're personalizing, we all get that email that says, hey, I see you're the global head of lead management at Palo Alto. Congratulations. That's personalization in today's world. Real personalization is mentioning someone's colleague. Real personalization is saying, I know that you downloaded this and your colleague downloaded that. maybe you're working together on this project. And so we saw immediately that they were getting more response.
Mm-hmm.
And then we saw that they were setting more meetings because they were talking, and not initially the initial MQL. Sometimes it was the second or third person that said, sure, let's have the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Even further, when the meeting has 2 or 3 people versus the one networking administrator, the sales teams, the field sales teams, were taking those meetings more. They were taking those meetings more and converting those into pipeline holding opportunities at a higher rate, because they're like, oh, suddenly this is a more interesting meeting to me. Oh, you got a
Yep.
VP of cloud security and networking admin? Okay, I'll take that meeting. And so immediately those metrics were terrific. We saw moving out of omitted into pipeline, and we even saw we saw progression to future stages, and we even saw a few, and I use it anecdotally, we saw a few closed won deals that happened. And it showed a more, again, very anecdotal, but we saw that closed one really show that this is gonna work. So all that early evidence, but even the further, we'd wait for much more maturity on some of those ops, but we saw that across the board, and we were like, wow, this is amazing. And we showed that to our VP, and he said, wow, that's amazing. Let's show our CMO. So we put together a presentation. We got in front of our CMO, and he said, and if you know Terry from Forrester, he uses this statement a lot. He goes, yeah, the leaders will often say, yeah, that's cute. And he kind of said that to us. He goes, yeah, that's cute. He goes, it's nice conversion rates, but very small. So we said, oh, how can we make this more impactful? We can run a pilot longer, but what if we talk to our data science team and had them extrapolate the last 4 quarters of data against these results? So 4 quarters of actuals against these results. And, we took an assumption that if you had 100% of opportunities with buyer groups in our extrapolation, and we saw, and I'll just name one number, it was about a 13% increase in revenue. And a company of our size, you can imagine that number. Now, remember, that was assuming 100% coverage of buyer groups in opportunities. But suddenly our CMO was like, when we presented that data back to him, he suddenly said, okay, he goes, do more of that. And so now we knew we were onto something, because we didn't even talk about pipeline. We talked about revenue. And, again, to move the needle on, someone asked me, did you really get 13%? I said, that was an extrapolation based on 100%. We are seeing increases in revenue now that we're, this far into it. But it's not obviously that. And I'll talk about that when we get to it. But it's about coverage of opportunities that have buy groups. So now we had our CMO buy-in. Our pilot worked. What was next?
Yeah. What was next? So how did you approach the next stage?
So the next stage was, we said, okay, now we're coming into the second half of our fiscal year. We want to do 2 things. We want to expand the pilot, and we want to start to build automations to take these very difficult processes of building a new opportunity or adding people to an opportunity and create a much more operational methodology for it. So when we started to show the data to the BDR teams, more of them were suddenly like, okay, I'll join in that. We even had some BDR teams that quit because they didn't like how hard it was. So we had some teams that didn't stay, but the ones who got it, and were getting the results, and new teams came on board. So that was in our third quarter. We started to expand the pilot, and we started to map out our operational changes, system changes. Remember I said people, processes, and now we're going to make the system changes. Last, you could, by the way, you could design this, spend a year designing this and thinking about how it should work and boiling the ocean on it, and you could get to the end and it could be wrong and it could not work. I really tell people that if you're doing this, organic growth in this model is really an important thing, because you got to be able to make course corrections as you run into problems. And here's where we ran into a problem. Forrester says, now remember, all this work was going on manually. We're still working with loose leads and contacts. And we said, now we want the opportunity object. Forrester says use the opportunity object, the opportunity contact roles as the pre-pipeline, marketing-owned, pre-opportunity. Our sales ops team, our IT team said, absolutely not. Don't touch our holy opportunity object. And by the way, we're not alone in that. A lot of teams at large organizations, we're a big org, they're not going to let you touch their opportunity object. Why does marketing need... we even had a Forrester analyst, expert in sales ops, come on and talk to them. And they're like, nope, not going to happen. It's okay, you got to make a course correction. So we started to think about a custom object. But with the operational piece, what we did was we created a custom app in our cloud platform that, again, initially for everything we used MQL as the trigger, and then we went to intent. But we said, when an MQL happens, previously, remember I said the BDRs would go to demand base, they would look stuff up, and they would manually take ownership of them. That was a lengthy process, 10 steps for each person you want to pick up. Now, we said, when a BDR got an MQL and accepted that MQL, it triggered this automation to run, which did all that work. It looked in our CRM, it looked for people from those accounts that had the right persona and had engaged with that product in a recent time frame. And it took those people and it assigned them to that same BDR. So now BDR accepts a lead, suddenly they get 2 or 3 other people.
Yep. Regardless if they scored up or not. It's just it's a swarming. What we want to see is a swarming, right?
Exactly. It was not about the score. It was about the engagement.
Yeah. Yep.
So the other part of it was adding people to an opportunity. Again, I got a guy, a second MQL. There's an opportunity. If I want to add him, I have to add the contact role, and I have to do the thing to the campaign member, and do the thing to the lead, and all the 10 steps to get that person on there. But we created an automation that allowed them to. We had a previous disposition, a negative outcome for a lead that said already engaged with sales, existing op, and that was throwing. I'm in Florida. I like to say catch and release. That was throwing the lead back in the pool. Okay. Oh, there's already an existing op. Well, we said, why don't we change that? Why don't we make that a positive conversion? And when they select that outcome, a list of opportunities comes up for that product in that account, and they can select it. They select it, and it does all of those things behind the scenes. Even sending an email to the opportunity owner saying, I've added this person to your opportunity. And I want to come back to that point. But those automations now started to give us scale. And in the second half, we built out those automations. And really, by the end of our second half, July of 24, which is it's July of 24, the end of our fiscal 24 year, we had these built, and they were fully operational across all of our BDR segments. We had also built dashboards so that we could measure the impact of opportunities with buying groups and without. And so it took us, almost a year. But at this point, we were at global scale on the sales side, because we also use, and again, it doesn't matter what product you use, we use Lean Data internally for our lead routing and scoring. Lean Data has a great contact to opportunity match, and we're able to, when leads come in, and again, you said this earlier, we're not waiting for them to MQL. When a person comes in and does one thing with us, we look to see, okay, if we know what account they're from, does that account have an open opportunity for this product? Are they a persona we want? If they are, attach them directly to the opportunity.
Yep.
And alert the opportunity owner. And here's the cool thing. There's a myth that sellers don't want marketers to touch their opportunities, don't want BDRs to touch open opportunities. Well, they don't want you to talk to a CEO when it's in stage 4, right? But if you get a new person in and you reach out to that op owner, and the BDR says, hey, I got this guy, he's a VP, he downloaded this, you want me to qualify him, or you want me to add him to your op? Sometimes they'll say, go ahead and qualify him. Sometimes they'll say, add him to my opportunity. But what they said overall was do more of that. And so the myth that sellers don't want BDRs or marketers to touch or enhance their opportunities was proven false.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So what were the results of this sort of phase 2? Like what'd you see?
So in phase 2, we were able to see that those metrics continued to rise. So here's what we saw as we started to scale up and these opportunities matured. You heard me say earlier, more opportunities were created. You heard me say those opportunities resulted in meetings that resulted in pipeline holding opportunities. We now saw much more progression to future stage. And here's an exciting one, bigger deal sizes. Because as you add more people to a deal, especially people with bigger titles and decision-making titles, they have the ability to make the deal bigger. Right. And so we saw a bigger deal size, and then we saw better close win rate. And it's interesting, when we looked at it based on volume, and I'll come back to this. When we looked at it based on volume, the close win rates were not better. But when we looked at it based on dollar size, when there were buying groups present, the deals were always closing at a higher rate. And so what was really neat here was we saw across the entire funnel that outcomes were better. And we started to think about how can we, look at this? And we got to a point where opportunities with buying groups are now generating enough pipeline. And we're calling it incremental pipeline because we say, hey, if there's 100 opportunities with a single guy and 100 opportunities with 2 or more, those are going to be 2x or 3x deal size depending on the segment. And so, simple math. If these are worth $1 million and these are worth 2x, that's worth $2 million. That's an incremental $1 million in pipeline. And so our CMO loves it. And we started to think about a couple of also new metrics. One is stopping this idea of MQL to opportunity and starting to think about campaign to opportunity, because all those people you capture are now fair game instead of just that one MQL. Let's say you get 5 people from an account. In an MQL world, you're only talking to that one. In a buying group world, you're talking to all 5. The other one, and this is I touched on earlier, is the coverage, right? When you think about our extrapolation assumed 100% coverage. In our latest quarter, we're at about 12% coverage. Globally, across all opportunities that were created, were closed won last quarter, those opportunities were, or created in the quarter, it's created in the quarter. It was about 12% of opportunities created in the quarter were included buying groups. And so we said, wow. So we started to set a new metric, a marketing metric of, can we increase that to 15%? Can we increase that to 20%? Because if you think about all those traditional metrics that are up, bigger deal size, bigger conversion rates, if we increase the volume of ops that have that, well, you're going to get a better outcome from a business perspective. So that's what we saw as we expanded, and then we came into this new fiscal year, which began in August. Q1 and Q2, which we just finished, we were actually asked to include buyer group metrics for the first time in our QBR that reports to the CMO. So it's not cute anymore, it's at scale. And what we really began when we had that scale on the sales side is we began in this new fiscal year, we began the transformation on the marketing side. We began working with campaign leaders and campaign managers to understand what buying groups really meant and how they could help them get better outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we started to think about how do you train marketing leaders to focus on buying groups? Well, you've got to change your targeting because they're still hyper-focused on MQLs and they're hyper-focused on decision-making personas. So you say in a traditional method, I want a majority, you say to your media partners, I want a majority of decision makers and a minority of influencers. Man, 70-30%, right? Well, we say, stop asking for the majority and minority, start asking for a majority spread of representation. If you have 5 buying group members, you should have at least 3 coming out of your campaign. Not if you get 5 people out of a campaign and they're all networking admins. Well, great, you got 5 networking admins. But if you get 5 people and they represent 3 different title groups, that's a much better outcome for the campaign. That will end up being a much better outcome down the funnel. And remember, if we're deliberately driving them there, so that's a new marketing metric that we're training them on and saying, a marketing targeting metric is stop saying, here's my persona list, give me a majority of decision makers. Say, here's my persona list, give me a majority of the representation. Give me a spread of that representation. And that's not to say that some media companies don't give you really great coverage of one particular persona. But in general, especially when you think about syndication and you think about large programs that are trying to bring in large volumes, starting to focus on that spread will help to get better outcomes. And then the other side of it is getting them to start to think about this idea of campaign to opportunity versus MQL to opportunity. Because again, I do simple math for this stuff. You drove 1,000 leads that converted at 10% to 100 MQLs that converted at 10% to 10 opportunities. Okay, well, what if you drove 1,000 leads and instead of only talking to the 100 MQLs, maybe you're talking to 500 of them because there's signal that's showing these accounts are in market. And so the outcomes could be more than the 10 opportunities, or even if it's the same 10 opportunities, they could be bigger opportunities. And so starting to get marketers to start thinking that way, really, and that's a challenge because, again, leadership, very hyper-focused on MQLs and MSP. The other side of it is we can now more effectively measure marketing influence, okay? So traditional marketing influence is measured like this. Oh, I had an engagement after an opportunity has been created. I'm going to call that fuzzy match, and I'm going to say I get credit for part of that opportunity because of my. But we know sales thinks of that. We know what sales thinks of that. And so instead we say, well, when you get a person who engages and they actually get attached to that opportunity, first of all, you're creating direct marketing influence because now that's actually direct. You're attaching that person to the op. They belong to that op. Second one is you're giving the seller context and you're giving seller the ability to act on it. And I'll give you this one anecdote I always tell. We had a BDR. He added a lead to an opportunity. He contacted the rep. He said, hey, I got this VP downloaded a total cost of ownership ebook. Do you want me to add him to your opportunity? The seller said, oh my God, yes. I have a meeting with that guy next week, and his opportunity has been stalled for 3 months, and now I know what to talk to him about.
Yep. Incredible.
Yeah. So this is the kind of stuff that we're seeing today. And what we're working on right now is really penetrating the marketing organization with this concept. We're also really working with them. It's funny how we can kind of coach things in MQ. Still, people still think about MQLs, but I had people come to me recently. Again, I run lead management. They're saying, "Oh, we have a lot of stalled funnel. There's a lot of leads that aren't progressing. There must be something wrong with scoring." Well, no, you have a lot of people that only did one thing with us. So how do you use Signal? And I'm going to touch on this now. How do you use buying group Signal to actually go after those people that are in your funnel but not moving? And so we're creating a new scoring model, right? Our new scoring model uses 4 signals. Now remember, in our pilots, we used MQL as the trigger. We now use Signal as well as the trigger. So in our first pilots, we used, again, demand base. It can be 6 cents. It could be anything. But we use their intent signals to say which accounts are surging, and we do things with them. We'll put them into mid-funnel marketing programs. We'll drive them to the BDRs early as a buying group, not waiting for them to MQL. So that was our first pass, and now we're actually taking that and we're putting together a new scoring model that contains 4 elements. And I really think that this is something that people really need to think about. So the 4 elements are fit, propensity, ideal customer profile. Obviously, you don't want to, not to say you shouldn't consider everyone, but you really should focus these efforts around people that fit your ICP. The second one is intent. And it's not just demand base's third-party intent or 6 Sets' third-party intent. It's second-party intent from vendors like TechTarget. It's first-party intent from your own website and your own email. How many people from that account are on my website this week? How many pages did they view? How many times did they come back? All the traditional web metrics. They could never fill out a form, but that really could mean something, right? And so the intent piece, first, second, third party. The third metric is engagement. Traditional engagement, right? Traditional engagement is lead scoring. I got 20 points for doing this. I got 30 points for doing that. Well, again, if we talk about web visits and how many people are coming to the site and the type of content they're consuming, we look at that intent and engagement piece as sort of this mix together to say, wow, this account is showing a lot of signal. And then the fourth one, and I touched on this earlier in the targeting, is completeness, right? Having 50% or more of your buyer group. And I'll give you an example. We use these signals in a mixed way to activate in different places. So sometimes we might say, oh, if they have a high intent signal and they have a high completeness signal, let's do these marketing tactics, but also let's bundle them up and give them to the BDRs as a group early.
Yep. So I have a question for you. I have a couple questions, but one I wanted, because we're talking about it right now, is on the signal piece. I think a lot of companies right now are looking at intent, and they're trying to find buying group coverage through what's happening at websites and website visits and downloads and webinars. So, but I think there's a lot of ways you can get to that by also looking at what historical deals have we had with these accounts, so that if we're starting to see some smoke at the top, perhaps we know who the buying group is because we had an evaluation a year or two ago, and either we lost it to a competitor or maybe it was a closed no decision. But we've got insight into what that buying committee looks like from historical opportunities. What role does historic opportunities play in sort of piping those people into, I guess, the early stage opportunity that the BDR could then start connecting dots on?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So we actually, with our custom application and our custom object, we're actually doing that. So our custom object sort of mirrors the opportunity, right? So if we're building this custom object, we're building a buying group, and then that buying group becomes an opportunity, and that goes to closed won or closed loss. The opportunity carries that same, like a lead, right? Like a lead disposition. The
Yep.
opportunity, the buying group carries a similar disposition and says, oh, this was closed won, this was closed lost, whatever it is. When we see a new buying group forming, we're actually looking at if there is an existing one, and
Hmm.
we will clone that into the new one. Because what we'll say is, why should we start from zero, right? If we knew there was a buying center here, let's put them in. Now, some of those people might no longer be at the company, and that'll be discerned by BDRs. Some of those people might not be at the same job, and again, those will be discerned. But we start with that and using that historical data. In our signals, in our first, second, third party signals, part of the signal is what's in our CRM. Part of the signal is our closed won
Yep.
opportunities in that particular GTM,
Yeah.
not just for that account, but for any opportunities that are in that GTM, and we look at it by segment, and so that we can say that historical data goes into telling us if that's part of our fit model, part of our propensity model, right? Where we're
Yep.
saying, how does this account look like compared to accounts that have gone to closed won? And so that data is really important, that historical data, whether it's for the single company and reactivating a buying group, or for our larger measurement against what we think will be the outcome here.
Yeah. Okay. And then the second question was, I guess it's more of a process question, which is when you're serving all of this to the BDR, what has to be met in order for them to start passing it over to the AE in this new motion? So, maybe number of buying committee members engaged, confirmed opportunity, band criteria. Like, just curious, like, how does this change the handoff process?
So in our organization, our BDR's main goal is to set the meeting and create the $0 opportunity. So that hasn't changed. If they
Okay.
can only set the meeting with one person, they're going to do that, right? They're not going to hold these things. So from our perspective, we are not holding anything back. If they have an opportunity to create the opportunity, they'll do that. I have spoken to some organizations that are doing it that way, that they're looking at it like, oh, you can't pass it to a seller until you have the majority of the buying group. We've thought about that. And, one of the things that I try to do when I come into this is not overthink elements about it, right? When we were building our new scoring model, we thought about weighting, and I said, let's not weight anything out of the gate. Let's let it go out, and let's see what it looks like. And it's the same thing here. I think about that like lead scoring, right? So if we didn't have lead scoring, individual lead scoring, everybody who did anything would just go to the BDRs, right? And we know when that happens, the conversion rates are terribly low. So what we're looking at is, we know that opportunities that have two or more people will perform better. But we're not going to not allow a BDR to create an opportunity with just one person. That's our particular choice internally. We may change that down the road,
Yeah.
but I think we would need to be. I think we would need to be at that metric I talked about, the coverage. I think we'd need to be at a lot higher coverage than 12% to start to do that. We'd need to get to the majority of coverage with buying groups to be able to have an argument to say we shouldn't be sending with less than one or less, right? And
Yeah.
I'm sure you've seen it. There are opportunities with zero people on them. So it's an interesting world. But I'm in marketing ops. I'm not in sales ops. And one of the interesting things at Palo Alto Networks is, we're still a traditional org with a marketing org and a sales org. We don't have a unified RevOps org. So again, that poses its own challenges. I will tell you this. This is not an easy transformation. And I like to say a lot of what we did was done through guerrilla marketing and guerrilla efforts, inside operations, pushing. And we ran into barriers, BDR teams that were like, I'm not doing this, I'm quitting. Sales ops saying we can't get the opportunity. You have to be able to pivot and garner that support where you can, from a VP versus a CMO, from a sales director versus a sales VP, right? Where are you going to be able to get that push and get people to adopt it? Because once you have it, the metrics speak for themselves.
Yeah, yeah. Um, where we're at right now, where you're at right now, as far as the payoff or the impact that it's made, I've heard you share some different metrics, but just curious if we can get an update in terms of like the improvements in deal size, win rate, pipeline velocity. Like, what brag a little bit here, Jeremy. Oh, you're on mute right now.
Sorry about that. We are still seeing bigger. I think when we reported this QBR that just for last month, we were reporting from Q2 that it was about a 2.6x deal size. And, again, you can imagine at a company like ours, that makes a big deal. We're seeing, conversion to opportunity at, when you're creating an opportunity focused on a buying group versus non-buying group, we're seeing like 3 or 4x depending on the segment. And again, I will tell you this, it's not the same for every segment. Some segments, SMB, we see buying groups in SMB, but not as many, right? In some spaces, we're actually seeing lower conversion to closed won, and again, we think about the idiosyncrasies of certain segments, but the majority of our segments, the majority of our deals are all in those better. And again, I talk about all these metrics. So creation of opportunity, the taking of a meeting and moving it out of omitted into pipeline, the future stage opportunities, the bigger deal sizes, and the closed won. We've been doing this now for a while. We have these dashboards that show us impact. They also show us coverage, so we can see by segment and by GTM where we have better buying group coverage. And we're actually working on a buying group dashboard now at the ABM level so that we can see that at the account level and see where we have the coverages by product, and being able to say, oh, well, for this product we have 20% in this account. For this product we have 60%. And so it's really, that's what we're looking at. And then the other side is that coverage piece. Our goal of increasing the total coverage of the opportunities, right? So like I said, I think last quarter it was 12%. We've set a goal this quarter of 15%. And that will, I think we were 11% or 10% in the first quarter, 12%, and now we're setting for 15%. And it's great because we're at scale, and it's not just BDRs what they're doing. It's our buying group automation that's running all the time. It's lean data that's running all the time. So you think about those two pieces. Lean data is taking action on everyone new who's coming in. Everyone new who's coming in, whether they MQL or not, those are going over to the ops. And that's where we see the largest volume of increase in building and expanding those ops. And we actually track that separately. We track ops that are created with 1 or less versus ops that are created with 2 or more. And then we also track opportunities expanded in quarter, right? So how many ops did we expand in the quarter? And what's interesting, someone asked me the other day, they go, well, do you think you're double counting? Because what if an opportunity is created in the quarter with one person, but then we add another person? I go, that's not double counting. That's an opportunity that was created and an opportunity that was expanded in quarter. Right. That's 2 very good things.
That's right. So, I wanted to just, so having the benefit of hindsight, right? So you've got all this experience and you've been in the trenches in the war. What would you do differently if you kind of knowing what you know now?
So I think I would have fought harder probably for some more executive support early on. It's tough, again, where you sit in an org, a large multifaceted org like ours. I think I would have tried that. I think I would have tried harder with the campaign teams earlier on. I think we're a small team and we can only do so much. Plus, I'm still running my business. I have other things besides buying groups, and so we were very hyper focused on BDRs. But again, I think getting more marketers involved after that first pilot, I think might have been something that I would revisit and advise people to do. You don't want to get them in at the beginning with no data, but I think once we had that data, we could have involved some of the campaign leaders that we're really working with now that we didn't engage until maybe 2 quarters later at the beginning of this current fiscal year. But otherwise, I stand by what I said. I think you have to start with the sales org. I think you have to do it organically. You really need to plan in phases and do a phase, get to the end of that phase, evaluate where you are, make a course correction or expand, and then go forward from there. Because you could literally, I've actually spoken to people who and I won't name any names, but I've spoken to orgs that look like us that tried this and they spent a year and a half trying to design and build something and it failed because they never got to something that they were trying to boil the ocean. And I think that's another piece of it. If you are a new company with a RevOps leader and a new stack, you can do it the way you want and you can do it pretty rapidly. But if you're a company like ours that's been around, we just celebrated our 20th anniversary this week. And if you are a company like ours that's been around, and I like to say that MarTech stacks and IT stacks in general are like the city of Rome. They're literally layers upon layers upon layers upon layers of years and years and years of different people building stuff. This guy built it, this guy edited it, this guy came in and did something else, this guy ripped it out and did something. People look around our systems and they're like, why does it do this? Why is it built like that? And that's a big thing that you encounter when you're doing this. Some of the changes we tried to make, we're like, oh, if we do that, it's going to break. So we need to do it a different way. And we had to rethink it and it was harder. So that's the other side of it, is this is not an easy transformation. You asked what I would change. I think there's only a couple of things that I mentioned that I would change. What I would tell people is you got to have staying power on this. It is hard. You're going to fight inertia because people have been doing this MQL focused, MSP focused world for a very long time.
Yeah. And that's a great segue to my next question, which is there are so many people who I think are really leaning in. I mean, you probably, I've seen it. The lines standing behind to talk to you after a conference are long, and I'm sure you get the LinkedIn follow-ups with questions. What advice would you give? I guess there's two parts to the question. One is, what is the most common objection you hear in terms of why people haven't adopted? And two, what advice would you give them to help make that first step, like to just start getting some movement? You're mute.
Sorry about that. I think that the biggest objection from marketers' perspectives is I'm measured on MQLs. And I'm not even measured really on influence. I'm measured on source pipeline. So okay, that's a hard thing to overcome. But I think that when you show that you'll get more opportunities created if you think about the buying groups, you stop to think about campaign to op versus MQL to op. And at the end of the day, you're going to get more pipeline, and whether that's sourced or influenced. I think that the advice I have for folks is start with something small like we did. Start with something small where you can start to see early results. You can do stuff on the marketing side also. You can start to do targeting for buying groups. Most of our vendors today have buying group type objects, buyer journey objects, where they are able to drive someone through a connected journey. And so marketers could start to show. We did an early display test where we were targeting buyer groups in their state or in their journey stages, and we saw the click-through rates were better. We saw the conversion rates were better. So there's early stuff that you can do that will show this anecdotal evidence that will get your buy-in from your leaders. I think that's the real trick, and we still face it. I mean, even though we're showing this difference, and we've seen our what we call booking influence has really gone up. Our leadership is still very focused on source pipeline and MQL counts, but we're making a difference because when we talk about things like incremental pipeline, when we talk about bigger deal sizes, when we talk about things like higher closed won, it really resonates. And I'll give you an example in the traditional world. I recently lowered the score for our traditional scoring. I lowered the score on one particular tactic, and it cut the MQL volume in half in the first quarter that was implemented. But it also changed the conversion rate almost by 3x up. And it also drove about a 50% more in pipeline from those outcomes. So we drove fewer MQLs, but we drove better MQLs. And it's the same thing. If we think about moving away from MQLs and we start to think about driving a buyer group in your campaigns, surrounding them. Someone said to me, but click-through rates on display is terrible. It's 0.2%. I go, I don't care. They don't need to click. They need to see it. And if they click on it, they don't need to fill out a form. They just need to engage. They need to see it. Because guess what? That display ad that gets shown to a VP or that social ad that gets shown to a C-level on LinkedIn, when he is asked to sign a check, he's like, oh, yes, I've heard about those guys, and I'll sign that check. So even the awareness of surrounding an account, not getting the MQL, not getting the form fill will really help to drive it. I call it compounding interest on your campaigns.
Yep, love that. Love that. Well, look, we are at time. This has been a fascinating episode. I love everything that you talk about here. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining us and sharing your wisdom. I think we're going to see each other in a couple of weeks at Forrester. So let's grab a drink or lunch together. And that is another episode of the Revenue Lounge. So Jeremy, thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
All right, take care.